You're going to be living only a partial existence and thinking that it's going to give you everything you need to be satisfied and whole. And it can't give you that because it's only a small piece. Our persona, our ego, our individual existence is only a fraction of that.
Hello, welcome back to Soul Sessions. This is Deborah Barrett Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado with Creative Mind, and we are so excited to end our series on dreams. Not excited, but this last episode is juicy. It's about dreams and the self, the last stage of individuation. So this is where all the big magic happens our lives. And before we dive in, I do want to ask you to please subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, just click the button here in the corner. If you're listening to us on audio, podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, don't forget to subscribe so you can get every episode of Soul Sessions. And here we're talking about our favorite topic, individuation and dreams.
Yeah, and thank you for all of you who submitted dreams, incredible, beautiful dreams, and we promise to treat them with respect, with kindness, and give you some insight if we can on them. So we've talked about shadow dreams and how dreams play into our shadow work. We talked about how dreams help us through the integration of the animus, or for men, the anima. Now, the third stage of individuation takes us into the self. And the self, there's various ways of defining the self, but Jung really kind of narrowed it down to this idea that if you consider that we're more than our conscious mind, meaning we're more than our conscious waking awareness, there's a deep unconscious mind. And if you put it all together, both conscious and unconscious, not only the personal unconscious in the Freudian sense, but the collective unconscious.
And when we say unconscious, it's not in a coma. It's where our conscious mind is not conscious of it. It's very much alive. So our, all this soup of universal power and the collective psyche that we can't see on an everyday level. And so it's everything.
So the totality of that is the self. The totality of both the conscious mind and the unconscious mind put together is what Jung defined as the self. Now, in Eastern philosophy, the self is described slightly different, but it has similarity.
It's almost like in my book, like a spark from fire. It's the spark and the fire are the same substance. It's just different in name and form. So if you look at everyone in the world, every situation in the world, all the items in the world, they're all made up of the same stuff. They're just shaped and look in different forms, but on the pure level, it is all a part of the self, and then we are that self. So we are connected to all of that, and so we want to discover that self-actualization is that's what that means, is to realize we are the self. We are not the ego.
Yes, and in 2024, we hope to have Swami Tyagananda join us for a podcast, and so we'll ask him about the self in Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. He's a monk of the Ramakrishna order, and so he studied Eastern philosophy deeply, and so he'll be able to enlighten us on that. But for now, the self, according to Jung, is this totality of our psyche, both conscious and unconscious.
Or not ours, like our personal psyche, but everything that exists.
Yes. And so individuation then is the letting go of our over-identification with the persona and moving towards the center of ourselves and identifying as the self, the larger self, the true self.
He often calls it circumambulation, where, in our Western world, we think of personal development as stages and levels, like a staircase or a linear process. This is actually a circumambulation, which means we're getting pieces of ourselves and we're constantly working toward the center. A good analogy of this is every fable, every superhero myth about the ordinary person discovering their magic and having these universal powers. They were just an ordinary person, and then they realized they had these special powers, and they were able to do incredible things, and acting outside of their own personal needs for the greater good of all. That's really ultimately, as a human being, what we hope to achieve in our lifetime, is get the ego out of our selfish desires and really be kind of a representative of something greater in us expressing itself in the world.
Yeah. So it is a journey, and we see in Jungian psychology this idea of integration, meaning that we're almost like collecting the pieces of our psyche, right, that have been fragmented throughout time, or just through experience,
discarded or forgotten.
Yeah, or we've never really considered those things as part of who we are, and through this process of growing our awareness, personal development, of looking inward, as he says, taking that journey inward and really trying to understand who we really are, that we start to gather those pieces and integrate them.
And part of it is also this non-judgment toward our past, toward our emotions, toward other people, and more of a self-acceptance on a deeper level, and a non-attachment to how our ego wants things to play out. We kind of move into a greater place of existence, of expression, and it's a beautiful thing. And we see ourselves as a force of nature, and not a flaw in nature.
Very much so. Yeah, the idea of individuation, right, of identifying with the soul in us, as some would put it, connects us to the universe. And so that as individuals, we start to lose our limited identity. We don't lose our mind, in a sense, because we still need it, but we see it in the right context, that it's an instrument. It's a part of the way the self, the larger self, expresses itself in the world through us, right? We're representatives or one piece of that higher self, but that the self is privy to, it's connected to, it is the essence and the source of where the universe comes from, how it arises, how it is created. And so it's leading to this non-dual awareness, right? That it's connecting us to everything, meaning everything I'm seeing, everything I'm experiencing is the self. Therefore, if I am the self as well, then everything I'm seeing is myself as well. And so it's that ability to be in harmony with the universe and the cosmos.
And I think it's much needed in the world right now. I mean, this is why we have wars, because we're projecting onto each other. That's why there's discord in relationships, and people acting out of ego and out of desperation and out of fear. When if we knew that we are the self, and that other person is basically another aspect, that we have that connection, I think the world would be kind of a more harmonious place. So we need to do our own work in order to basically change the world. And I love this stage of individuation, because it's almost like you're throwing away all those like childish, egotistical like desires. I mean, you're not giving up like what you want in life, but it's not coming from ego anymore. It's not coming from compensation or to competition. It's coming from, I just feel like expressing this. And it's a beautiful place to be. It's like getting your ego to step aside and allowing this greater nature to be expressed through you. It's a beautiful thing to witness in yourself. And so how do dreams play a role in this?
Yeah, so Jung noticed that in history, if you look at other cultures and historical documents and just folklore and mythology, dreams have always had that part to play in human affairs, that the messages that God would send to human beings was through dreams. The dream was the prophecy in a way. It was a way to hear the voice of God or the gods, right? Because not all cultures were monotheistic. The Greeks and Romans had a pantheon of gods. In India also, you see many, many gods. How did these gods communicate with human beings? Often through dreams, through visions, through that those symbols that come in the night. So it's been a powerful force in shaping human culture and human history. And Jung was after developing a psychology that accounted for that. Not necessarily that he believed that we should go back to some pre-state of
not like a indigenous, like kind of put our Western mind into like some other culture. It's more like how do we make it a part of our culture as a modern man?
Something like that. His idea was that because we don't evolve that fast, in other words, we're not going to lose that need that we have to connect to the cosmos through these gods or through the deities. They're not. It's simply not going to drop off because now we're focusing on technology. That need is going to be there, and that if it's not fulfilled, if it's not paid attention to, it's going to work against us. And this is an idea in Eastern philosophy as well, that if you do not attend to the self acts as an enemy towards you, because it's like,
it feels like an enemy to the ego. Like you're shaking up my life and I have everything in order. And now you're bringing this like crazy thing interfering, but it's the self coming to move you along and shake things up on purpose. And from the ego's perspective, it feels like the enemy.
Right, because you're going to be out of harmony with the true self in you, meaning you're going to be living only a partial existence and thinking that it's going to give you everything you need to be satisfied and whole. And it can't give you that because it's only a small piece. Our persona, our ego, our individual existence is only a fraction of that.
I know. And we there's so much more to us. And most people live their lives just on the surface and having these like almost like small human problems that tear them down. And it's almost like we have to tap into something bigger than us. And what typically happened in cultures is they would project that power onto a deity, right? They would project that power externally in order to kind of deal with life in a way.
That's right. Yeah, the deities, and especially in the Eastern philosophy, you see that they were used to focus that sense of self, the higher self, in an individual symbol or form. That Krishna essentially represented the higher self, meaning the pure awareness of the universe.
Buddha.
And that way the human side of us can easily communicate and access and conceptualize that self instead of just thinking of it in the abstract form of it's the totality of myself, right? It's a hard concept to hold in mind. But when you have a deity, a symbol that represents the self, it's easier. You can meditate on it. You can conceptualize it and relate to it as well.
It's sort of like if you think about the ego is the limited self. There's limitations. It will only take you so far. And then we also have our self-concept, which like boxes us in. And then the big self is this unlimited self. Like there's pure potential. Like Buddha or Jesus or all these like deities, they created miracles in a way. Like it felt like a miracle because they had these special powers. And so we have them, we just don't use them. we if we expand our mind to beyond the ego, beyond the persona and individuate, we get to access the powerful, amazing awesomeness of all of who we are.
So
dream.
What do dreams have to do with this?
Yeah.
And we like to present a dream along with our lecture or our discussion just to give it some practicality, because many of you have had these types of dreams and perhaps you didn't know what it's talking about. So this is not a typical dream of the self, but we see some archetypal elements that point to the self here.
And archetypal is images and symbols of universal patterns.
Yeah. And Jung always emphasized the mandala as the perfect symbol of the self. This is not a mandala dream, though. So for those of you that have had mandala dreams, those are definitely dreams of the self, but this is more kind of along the what we were talking about on our last episode, the animus, taking more of the father archetypal element to it. So this dreamer again is a person who is undergoing individuation. She's working hard to really look at herself and to understand her deeper connection with all aspects of her psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And so the unconscious, her unconscious, is giving her a particular dream that encapsulates where she is at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So in the dream, my grandfather, the grandfather, of course, is the archetype of God.
Or the wise old man, right?
Yes, it's the great father,
Mm-hmm.
meaning it's the archetype of God. How do people think about God in monotheistic religions? They often think of God as a father,
Mm-hmm.
father spirit. So she says there was one dream where my grandfather and Rumi, the poet, who we can think of it as the muse, or of Rumi in this case as her muse, right? Her connection to poetry and the spirit. The grandfather and Rumi walked me to a boat one night. So, well, I'll read it and then we'll go through it.
Yeah, it might be easier just to read the whole thing and then we can go back. Yeah.
So I got into the boat. The ocean was dark. I ended up somewhere that was all white and blue ocean. A baby passed by on the surface of the ocean, and I grabbed it. Then there was a white horse, and my grandfather told me to get on and pointed towards a white castle as it being my home. The horse took me there with the baby. Inside the so-called White Castle, in the center of the main room, was an open book. My grandfather and Rumi appeared again. So the Great Father, meaning the spirit, the animus in her, now has become closer to that great spirit, God, right? The essence of God, which is often a symbol of self. In Eastern philosophy, we know the Atman, which is the individual soul, is identical to that Brahman, to the divine cosmic self. So these two are the same. In other words, the grandfather is equal to the soul, which is equal to the higher self. And Rumi, also an aspect of the animus, as the muse, the bringer of inspiration. They both kind of walk her to a boat. What does the boat remind you of?
It's movement, a journey. And the ocean being dark is the night sea journey that Jung talks about, is going into the unconscious. The ocean of consciousness. The boat is a navigational tool to go on the ocean of consciousness.
Yeah, this is an archetypal dream. Almost all the symbols that appear here are archetypal, meaning
non-personal. Like they're not. Yeah. Except the grandfather comes in a personal form, but with everything else in the dream, she's not working on shadow work here. She's working on something.
That's right.
Much more grand.
Yeah. So she off on the boat, meaning she's entering the sphere of the unconscious. She's no longer on land. Now she's in the collective unconscious. And the ocean is white and blue. White and blue are both colors associated with spirituality. So she's in the realm not only of this deeper aspect of the psyche, but she's in the realm of spirituality.
Well, when I saw that it turned to blue and white, it was more the transformation, like the darkness became light. The unconscious that we can't see is now coming to consciousness and everything's clear.
That's right.
Like the sky and the clarity, and then white is purity and spirit.
Yeah. Another symbol of self, the baby.
Oh, yes.
So there's a baby floating on the water. This is, of course, a vision, a dream. And so she plucks it out of the water. Now that the symbol of the baby represents the birth or rebirth of the self. In other words, she's being reborn through this journey that she's undertaking. And it is kind of a summation of her individuation process, that as she undergoes transformation, as she ventures into the collective unconscious, the new self is found.
So would you say this is maybe more of that where she's going versus where she is? Because it's really like it's showing the whole journey. So it's not like there's work to do to get there, would you say?
Yeah, this is a particular aspect of the unconscious mind that it doesn't operate on the space-time continuum that we experience in our waking life. So in the unconscious, there is no before, present, and future. It's more of that infinite moment.
So we can have a dream like that, even though we are still doing shadow work, because it's kind of showing us like different stages of where we can be. Like, because we're multifaceted. We're not in one time and space at the same time, and we're always evolving. So it's like all the facets of us, some personal and some collective, we're experiencing all at once. But we can usually only see a little bit at a time, because it would be overwhelming to see all the facets of us and all the layers of our consciousness.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And also that individuation, as Jung formulated it, helps us make sense of this aspect of the unconscious, that it's giving us a very different picture of what reality is, that's not based on that space-time continuum. And how do we make sense of that? Through the individuation process. It's a way that we structure our relationship with the unconscious so that it becomes practical for us, that we're able to use it. Yeah, so the baby is a significant aspect of this dream. Another archetype. Then there was a white horse. So again,
very it's mythological, like the hero, right?
Yeah, and the horse, especially in this context, and this is also a particular aspect of dream interpretation, that you cannot read symbols independent of their context. In this context, then, the white horse reads as her animus and her totem power playing a big role in the process of her becoming her self.
Well, it's like kind of being supported, because we tend to think our ego feels like it needs to fix everything and analyze on that cognitive level again. And this is like, this is happening, or, it's like a supportive force that's kind of guiding and taking, it's like the currents under the sea, that it's like operating unconsciously and having that will to move what's on the surface.
And then the grandfather points her to the White Castle as being her home, her new home, right? The self, the royal self, like you mentioned, is the Lion King, right? And those kind of mythologies.
That you realize that you're the king. You have these powers. You were born with this magnificence.
Yes, they point to this connection, right? In ancient myths and in ancient cultures, the king and the queen were representatives of the divine. In other words, they weren't ordinary people. They were vessels of the divine. So where do they live? They live in the castle, meaning the home of the divine on earth. So the grandfather's pointing to the castle, meaning this is your new home. This is your new, the new self that you're going to live in. And as she goes there, the book of life, for her, she interpreted it as being the Quran, and it rightly so, right? For her and her culture and the culture that she grew up in, the Quran was the book of life, the word of the divine.
The divine word, yeah.
In symbolic form, it represents the book of life, where the names of the people that individuate or that undergo transformation are written.
Oh, okay.
So she finds her name in there.
Oh, okay.
And that's the symbolic form, right? That the unconscious is pointing her through all these symbols towards her new identification as the self.
Versus her self-concept as the persona ego.
That's right.
It's like taking what your inheritance is this true self.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. And so, again, I know some people have dreams like this that I work with, and they're still doing shadow work, but then they have this dream and they think, oh, I guess I'm done with shadow work. Yeah, I'm this, the self, and I'm having all these dreams. But we always have to know there's layers and layers to different. We're working on many layers of ourself at the same time. But this is more like it's getting closer, or where you're going, right? Then you don't have to do shadow work anymore, and you're complete.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because
it's just showing you, like, here's how the story ends, basically.
Yeah.
Give you a little preview.
It has a lot to do with what your purpose on the waking stage of life is. We know people take vows and abandon or renounce the world and go live in a monastery and simply focus their whole life on the spiritual aspect of their life. Most of us do not, right? We have to stay.
We have to have a job or a career,
everyday life, right? And she is one of these people that they're staying in their everyday life, and so the idea of them becoming the self is not necessarily dropping what they're doing with their limited mind, right? Their temporal limited self has to remain in the world and continue to function. Therefore, this dream of becoming the self simply means that the realization of what her true nature is at hand.
It's almost like, for me with these dreams, having a direct experience of these dreams, and these, like, it gives you almost like a knowing that you wouldn't have just by reading a book or someone telling you, you are unlimited, you can do whatever you want. Like, you're having this like direct experience in a very symbolic, numinous way. These dreams a lot of times are numinous. They have this kind of magical quality. And then you're like, something's, there has to be something more than this ego. And so I think a lot of times these play also a role in letting you know that individuation is the path you should be on. Like, we've had people have these type of dreams right before they start our coach training or start one of our coaching programs. They'll have a dream like this. That's like, you're on the right track. This individuation is really where your path is leading you.
That's right.
And I like kind of a preview, like, for what's ahead. And then the feeling I like of the numinous feeling is something you can kind of anchor in and then have a sense of, this is what it feels like to be the self versus the ego. So you can kind of compare. That's what I like about it too.
Yeah, and also that time and space are transcended in the unconscious mind. In other words, it doesn't distinguish between where we were 10 years ago and where we are now. In the self, everything has happened already. And therefore, this person is already and has always been the self. It's simply expressing that in the dream.
So on an ego level, they may still, like, whatever their stage is in individuation, and then there's this potential that's already been realized, and it's just almost getting your conscious mind caught up to what you already know. Again, the superhero, Hercules going down to earth, being raised by, these farmers, not realizing that he's a god. There's a lot of mythology around that. And so it's that same message over and over again. Remember who you are.
Absolutely. And dreams speak that mythological, symbolic language. And therefore, we do not interpret them literally. We interpret them symbolically.
Like, it doesn't mean you're going to have a baby or the baby's coming in. And there's some precognitive dreams. We talked about that in previous episodes. But these dreams are like kind of big dreams that you'll never forget. They're really profound, and they feel like they're not about your human life. They feel that they're transcendent in a way. And so as we end our series, we really appreciate you all sticking with us and learning about dreams. It's really a fascinating technique that you can learn for yourself, but also as a coach. If you're interested in coaching, we train our coaches in dream interpretation. And if this sounds interesting to you, definitely look up our coach training program. We always have a cohort happening every few months. So we'd love to see you. And this is the type of work you want to do. It's really profound and interesting, and it's never a dull moment.
Yeah, it's a not a lost art.
But it's an art that you have to cultivate.
It's an art, and there's very few people now that carry on the tradition, right, of this art form of dream interpretation. But we certainly encourage people to continue to learn and to use it, right? Because especially if you're coaches, if you're a coach and you're helping others through their self-transformation, the power of the unconscious, right, of the messages that are coming through the unconscious to help them in that individuation process is incredibly powerful. And
there's only so much you can get on a cognitive level of asking questions and maybe visualizing and all those things. But when you work with dreams, it gives you so much more information that both you and the client are not conscious of, that it brings that extra element of the secret code that's operating underneath that you can access. And then the clients love it because they learn to interpret their dreams, and really in between coaching calls, they're learning about themselves. And it's fascinating. Did you know that my grandmother used to read dreams? My mother told me this like about a year ago. She's like, oh yeah, grandma used to have a dream dictionary and she'd always interpret people's dreams. And then my mother had it. And I'm like, this is part of the feminine inheritance of my family. The women of my family have that So it's no accident that I met you, and now we're doing dream interpretation. It's interesting how that works.
She's Irish.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, the Irish have a strong literary and mythological tradition, which includes dream interpretation.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been a great series. Our last show of the season. We will be back next year, 2024, with some new great content for you, new shows. And as always, if you have questions, post them in the links below in the comments. And we'd love to hear from you and what you want to learn about. Share with us. Say, hey, could you do an episode on this or that? We'd love to hear. And also just welcome to our community. And if you're new, and enjoy these deep conversations.
Absolutely.